pasture systems to optimize, and that's what we're looking at here. When I look at the future of this beef business, I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we want to put some jingle in the jeans, and the opportunity to take a profit out of this business is now. You guys, if you've stayed in it this long, holy smokes, have you ever weathered some storms? It is really important in my mind, and I know I've got a number of friends have said to me, we're not expanding, we're just going to, thank you kindly, put the money in our pockets. The fact of that is what we see also is some changes. The US never did tighten their belts like the Canadians did. Their cost of production is higher than Canada for a reason. They could. So they've had a tougher time than we think. The reason why? They weren't forced to address their industry critically questioning everything they did. So what we looked at and what we've seen is a lot of people move to grazing-based systems more so to address the cost side. And the reason why makes very good sense. In the 90s when we looked at it, we found about 2/3 of the cost was feeding. Winter feeding, forage in summer, and of that, about half of it was, in fact 2/3 to be honest with you in the 90s, was the winter feed side of the game. Right now, based on what happened through BSE, we're down to about half of it. So producers made notable changes to cut costs, and what I'm sharing with you today and is some of the data that we've got through our production economics branch, and Jason's here, Dale Khalil's data, both of them have put together for me, so we'll share some of that. I'm also sharing some things that we found when we worked with the Western Forage Beef Group and the ERICA associations around the province when we were working on the 365-day grazing publication. So we're really looking at it, and you'll see now even the ERICA associations, like when I say ERICA associations, I'm Grey Wooded, Foothills, West Central Forage Associations are all around us, Chinook Applied Research or the Battle River Research Group. They're all looking a little further now. They're even looking at the soil side of the game. And the reason why we'll talk about. There's a lot of different things I think we can invest in right now that are an opportunity to make this business even more profitable. Taking these profits now, putting it back into places where it's going to pay dividends. Burke Tykert, and he was the general manager of Deseret Ranch. He's a consultant now, writes, we really need to look at our business a little bit different way. And I think that's why you see so many people show interest in the fact that the forage associations are doing work on a lot of things, kind of not dealing with the animals as much as dealing with the soil. And really when it comes down to it, building around that from the other way. And we're looking at that soil side of the game so that our grass is more productive, so our animals are more productive. You've often heard the saying, I'd rather have good grass than bad cattle. But it's great if we have good grass and good cattle. But we can do a lot if we have good pasture, and that's one of the things to focus on. The interesting thing when we did this publication, and 16,000 of those were printed and went out into the industry, across North America even, and so we had people from the Maritimes, from the US calling, looking for that publication. It also addressed cost. On page 38 of that publication is cost of the various extended grazing systems, and looking at it kind of from a rounded position, and the production economics branch, Owen Nelson and myself did it. So I'm a little armed and dangerous with some of these things, but the thing we found so interesting about it was just as you start doing it, when you write something, when you start talking about something, you look at something a little differently. I'm sharing something from 2008, and the reason I am is because I wanted to pull out that winter feeding day. That was the last year that one of our departments pulled out the winter feeding day and put it down right there for you to look at. So as you're looking at that winter feeding day, that was the cost of yardage to winter a cow back in 2008 in Saskatchewan. Alberta's numbers are pretty similar. And with them being that similar, in my way of thinking, Do we think they're higher in 2008 to now? Do you think we went up? What was the labor cost to repair machinery in 2008? What was the fuel price in 2008? Now it's dropped a bit. The point to all of that is we really have to manage that side of the game for profit. And that's where I look at the grazing resource, linking those pasture systems to it as a real opportunity to capitalize on it. It's so crucial we get these numbers that we have in Alberta numbers even. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, this is maybe the last year we're going to get Alberta numbers. Everything changes and things move on, and I don't appreciate some of the things, but we're looking at a situation where back in 2008, yeah, it was a tough sled. When it came down to the bottom line, the reality of a summary of it was what we got and what we paid. Unfortunately, we didn't make the money we need, and that's why the money you're making today is so important for you. I challenge people to truly look at this, because of that year-round grazing publication we put together, we followed producers for five producers across Alberta from north to south. Followed them for a year. The ERCA groups worked with them. We kept their numbers. We followed them. And then, if you remember, what we found with all of them was interesting, is all of them highly valued their pastures. And when I put rotationally grazed, it's a term we use. They each did a really good job of managing their pastures. They valued their pastures. As one of them said to us, when I seeded a pasture, it was seeded to be a pasture. It wasn't an old hayfield that I converted into a pasture. So we've got situations they valued. The interesting thing, what we found, is the majority of people looked at corn grazing, bale grazing, swath grazing, and thought, you know, those are things we're going to do. And we were kind of in some ways a little bit startled. We thought, you know, the base of the whole system, the base of the whole strength comes from every one of these people crucially placing a value in the summer, because summer sets the stage for the winter. And all of those, as we look forward, you'll see, as I talked about with some of those soils things, we're really saying, you know, what goes on above the ground and what really translates into my green dollars comes from green plants that feed the soil. And as Christine Jones, who spoke in Olds at the college here just a couple of weeks ago, said, photosynthesis makes soil. We want to manage pastures for green leaf area. We want to manage them so they're healthy and vigorous, growing earlier in the spring, growing later in the fall. The reason why is Llewellyn Mansky, when he looked at it, he said, you know, if I just improve a grassland from average to healthy, so in other words, improving a grassland, it's not fair, it's not poor, it's average to healthy. So I'm going to take it one step up in assessment, if you want to call it. And when he did, he started to find, of course, yeah, yield went up, the amount of acres per cow-calf pair. So if we're looking to expand a herd, we're looking at the opportunity to run those animals on the same land with a little more forage there. It doesn't happen overnight, though. That's why we get people like Gary come to so many of our courses, right? It is a lifelong opportunity. But we're looking at pasture costs going down, and again, the thing about it that I like, it's just, there's a number of things happening, all based on us making a simple move in many ways. The other thing that Dale showed when he looked at it in 2010 is contribution of grazing to farm profitability. And what you can see here in the low-cost producer group, it in fact contributed greatly. Dollars per cow wintered, $80. When we look at the high-cost group that he separated in his benchmark sets of producers that Jason and him worked with, so we're looking at them, splitting them up and saying, okay, who's the high cost, who's the low cost, what are they doing to put themselves in this position? He found that the high cost people, grazing didn't contribute as much. In fact, there were spots maybe it came closer, but you know, and at times they didn't put the emphasis into the grazing side like that group did. And so that, again, trying to get to the bottom line. Why are some of these people low cost, high cost? And low cost is usually when it's a low cost per unit produced is actually a high profit. So it's kind of synonymous, one and the other. And the thing we like so much about systems is that with systems, the math never works. Bert Smith said a long time ago, systems are never neutral, and that's why we get surprised when some people say, you know something, I don't know why Eileen's managing her grazing here. I don't see some of the results across the fence, but when she's looking at it, she's seeing a number of things happen. You do one thing, as Lou Allenmansky showed, and a number of things start happening. Again, positive or negative, never neutral. Synergistic or antagonistic, never neutral. And the biggest thing about all of that, there is no one recipe. When you take a grazing course like Grey Wooded Forage Association puts on, they're going to deal with situations, talk about it, but the reality of it is it's going to be yours when you go home. So we're looking at principles and building around it, but it's really important to look at all those things in light of what's yours at home. Because so often, just breaking it down to what's at your place, which pastures are at your place, which pastures have the potential. And then, of course, we really want to look at it from a standpoint of, records if we can. Because I want to know which pasture is the most productive and why. I took a pasture out of production about 3 years ago. Why? It was on my best land, and it wasn't my best pasture. Somebody else might have said, it looks pretty good to me, but I knew it was by far from that. So the idea, if we keep records, how many of you have seen this little grazing notebook? Yeah. And it's an opportunity to see from year to year what's happening. It's an opportunity to look at it, comparing one piece of ground to another, and saying to myself, do I want to rent that from that guy? How much am I paying? All those things. And here's one of the pastures. This was a pasture probably, I know, I put an electric fence around the inside. That's not me, because I'm not that skinny. But as you can see, here's a fellow that believes in fence posts. And this situation is in fact what we sometimes see on pastures. And through a lot of the tough years with BSE, a lot of us left animals out longer than we wanted. And as one of the fellows said, we're grazing fresh air and sunshine. I just don't want to be paying somebody else for that. I'd rather have it on my own, but it does cost us. The thing we find so often, yeah, that's pretty cute, eh? You can hide. Did you guys saw me there, did you? You're quick. Anyway, often we find the pasture hides itself, and we look at the situation and we see, you know what? Boy, you look at it from the road, what we've got is overgrazed, undergrazed, overgrazed, undergrazed. Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to pay for that land? If you're trying to buy land with the high price of land as it is now. So this person out here is getting about 55% of the productivity probably, because these plants are overgrazed. And over here, he's getting very little productivity. I guess there's been a little picking on it. But the point of all that, of the high-priced land to now, we're looking at competing for resources against the yellow-flowered plant. And so as we look at some of that cropland, of course, a lot of these pastures disappeared. But if we're having an opportunity, we want to look at them in light of how we can manage them so that we're harvesting more per acre, but in a way that's even producing us more. I'm sharing an example here, and one of the reasons I'm sharing it is from Staveley. Staveley is south of Calgary. The moisture they get at this area is pretty good, 18 to 20 inches. So it's more similar for many of us in central Alberta. It's good soil. I'm wrong with 40 years, it's actually 50. Who can believe you'd have 50 years of data at a site? It went up to 65 before Ag Canada let this place go. So all these years are kind of down the tubes. But the point of it is heavily grazed over 40 years, moderately grazed over 40 years, and that's 50 actually, so I'll make a mistake. And what it was native pasture, rough fesco, prairie oak grass, but it's going to have something for you to see here that ties together. The interesting thing about it is, how many of you have seen that picture? Well, that picture is actually that. Nobody ever talks about what happened in the field. But up until last year, it was still happening. I don't know if it was or not. I don't know if anybody knows about the Stavely ground. Did they manage it the same way this year? Last year? Nobody knows. Okay. What we're seeing here, interesting enough, is everybody latched on to this. And as we've seen it, what we're really looking at is a situation where the plant that was left with green solar panel versus that plant, 9 times the top growth. How much did they harvest of it? Quite a bit of it, but still, lo and behold, you can see right away, they're still ahead of the game, though they took less. They got more. 12 times the root growth. Interesting enough, because I had one person say to me, well, that says we shouldn't be grazing. Well, you know, the interesting thing about that is, unfortunately, in many ways, I'm a hound for information, so I always go and dig things up. And I dug up the paper that was, in fact, from this project. No, I can't find it. There it is. And interestingly enough, what they found actually when it was in the field, so we're talking now going back to that field, is a little different story. What they found when it was in the field was that the plant that was lightly grazed had more roots to 54 inches than the plant that wasn't grazed. So we saw that picture with less roots. It actually had more when it was in the field, in the soil, not in the greenhouse. And as top growth goes, slightly less, but not much, than the non-grazed plant. The reality of that is they looked at it from a standpoint of ecosystem management. They looked at it as a standpoint of systems approach, and that challenging a plant properly means it'll rise to the occasion. Just like Neil French and Laura Bluck and Connie Burton work in there, challenging their students to do better. If they didn't challenge them, those students would rise only to the Thursday night occasion. Well, you know, that's the point of all of this. When you get challenged a bit, you step up to the plate. If the plants are challenged properly, they step up to the plate. And that's why what we saw over 40 years on the heavily grazed stuff, that was the soil in 2002 when we dug it. That was the soil in 2002 after 50 years. Which one would you rather have? The point of all this is that soil's got more organic matter, more carbon in it, more ability to capture water, hold more, release it more ability to grow green plant material, more soil life and everything in it, more soil structure to it, less erosion off of it. I could go on. But the point of all of that is grazing management has impacts, and it's easy to be deceived at times because it often isn't quite what it appears. The reason we're looking at it, and this is the important thing to take home, is that when we're looking at dollars and cents, to me, it's when we only remove 40% of that green leaf, we leave a huge green solar panel. Capture sunlight and to feed the roots of the plant. You know what's interesting? It appears that when 40% of the top growth was only taken, the root growth had no impact whatsoever. Percent of root growth stopped. Not even 10%. That's what you see when you look at guys that will graze a stand early and fast in the spring. They move over it quick. They want a plant to keep its roots and keep its shoots. That green solar panel that feeds it. The thing about it that's interesting, of course, is that if we graze it too hard, no matter when in the year, we start affecting the roots. When it was grazed, 80% of the plant material removed. We had about 90% of the roots stopped. So again, above ground, below ground, all of that affects our pocketbook. So when we start linking pasture systems, to me, it doesn't matter what we manage. It's understanding the fact that we've got a green solar panel there that wants to capture sunlight and wants to, in fact, do more. The interesting thing also about it is the paper I've got and the other one on these roots. You know the thing I hate about this? 1955. The other one was 1961. And so you look at forage research and you think to yourself, why wasn't more done? Well, the dairy cows went in the barn and research got cut back too. So there's a lot of reasons why, you know, it's a beef industry, but we're looking at things. I took a little trip when I was going down to the US this summer, out of my way. And well, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. It cost me a little bit in shoes. Who would think that? I wanted to see this scientist I've met many years ago. So I said to my wife, you know, if we take one day, if I spend one day with him, she said, that's just fine. Just find me a good shoe store. Who was I to know it was 8 hours out of our way? And Fargo, North Dakota is where we went to the shoe store. I drove all day to get there. And she made it there before her quitting time, and I sat and visited with a kid at the front, and she ran through that store just as happy as Gary would here if he was out there. But anyway, I did get a new pair of cowboy boots, by the way. So I did get something out of it. But what Llewellyn Mansky's showing down here is really neat, is that he's a 71-year-old guy that's carried out this grazing research for 40 years. And I said to him, how in the world did they let you do it in the US? He said, because they think I'm going to retire every year and they think the program's going to end. So they just let me go at it. So, but after all that time, he was a neat fellow in that the key thing he's looking at is the 3.5 leaf stage of any plant in the spring. Position yourself to start on it after that stage per tiller. So it's just like looking at a barley plant, removing a little as you move across the ground. What he found with that is that he had a 40% increase in yield. It's almost kind of going back to what they found at Staveley too. The other thing he found was the calf gain was 55 pounds more than the control where he put cattle out early. So we're talking about have your cake and eat it too. 40% more yield, 55% more calf gain. 55 pounds of calf gain more. But again, it's looking at a timing of grazing in my mind that puts dollars in our pocket. It was the most profitable rotation comparatively. So again, we're looking at how we link these systems. We can put legumes in the mix, and we've got a yellow blossomed alfalfa out now that's exciting. We've also looking at it from a cost side. Now I wanted to throw this in. It's in the handouts on the side for you to pick up. So if you went back there, you'd find Central Alberta data for tame native mixed pastures. And there's about 5 different pasture types. And this is what Dale and Jason did for us. It's cut off on the bottom, but all of this is ranked based on the lowest cost per animal unit. So they split the pool of people up. Here's the total numbers for the whole group. Then let's pick the top third that had the lowest cost per animal unit and see how they fared. What were they doing different? What was their opportunities and how much difference in profit? That's all of 3 times different in gross margin. Profits here, that's 9 times more profit. That's a lot. And these are producers from Alberta. 195 observations in total, 41 were pulled out and analyzed. So that's benchmark producers from Central Alberta, your peers. Does anybody here submit their data to Dale and Jason for analysis? 1 at the back, 2, 3, 4. Well, you guys are in here probably. But anyway, the point of all this is where we're talking about profitability and looking at linking these pasture systems. This is tame native mixed. I put it down because that's the majority of pastures I think most of us manage. They're the old hay fields that we've managed and become pasture. Chances are, I hate to say this, but all those you put up your hands, how long did it take you? A week to get your numbers ready or something? Close to that. Do you think these guys are normal? It's a lot of work, Eileen says. I don't know where I'd fit in there because I don't spend that much time. My point to all of this is, do we think we're at the top here? I probably think that I'm more down here. But the yield was 1/3 more roughly. So their yield was a third more on the same kind of land pool. And we start looking at it from a standpoint of a third more yield, what amounts to being in gross margin. So this is the person saying, should I plant it in canola or should I keep it in forage? 22 cents, $22. And if we're looking at the dollar per animal unit month, so right away, the producers were getting $6 per month per animal in returns. That guy was getting 14. They're still out there grazing. They're looking pretty similar, but they're a different story. I pulled out the legume grass pastures. There's only 82 here. There's less. So they pulled out 27. We saw about, holy smokes, that's over a third, isn't it? Over a third higher yield on a legume grass pasture. We looked at profitability versus the total, and where the other one was $22, remember when we looked back, this is 65, so it's 3 times more profitable. I know I like that yellow flowered plant that everybody plants, but when it comes down to our gross, our net, I wonder what the net is on some of these situations. People need to look at that. And I know that this one, when it came down to gross return, $77 an acre, we can hear that, well, canola can turn in maybe 500. But the thing about canola turning in 500, how much is the cost on it? Is it 450? Maybe we're getting a little closer in number. Again, we're looking here at an opportunity where the other one was $16 or $14, I believe. This one's 19 and change. Again, linking pasture systems. When I just put this up so you can see, because the other ones I didn't need to, I thought, I just confused things. But in central Alberta, the data average from 2000 to 2010, that's what those other sheets were. That's the difference in productivity of the legume grass in animal days grazing, and then, the native bush pasture. So I switched it to animal days per acre versus animal unit months. When we get the growth we get in central Alberta, we, in many ways, I think in days, I manage in days, I don't manage in months. So I switched it, I put my biases in there. But we're looking at a total situation where animal days per acre, we're up to, with the legume grass, about 60 days compared to the tame grass. We can see compared to the tame native mix, the native grass, the native bush. It doesn't mean that these two pastures should be worked up. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying look at all of this and see what the story is. And maybe those pastures have a great fit. I know mine, I count on them in drought. Their pasture is kind of set aside a little bit that I use harder then. But we're looking at an opportunity for costs and returns and looking at it averaged over 3 years for evenness. The interesting thing when you look at them, again, the stepping stones of total versus the top third, total versus the top third, total versus the top third, total versus the top third. We see the range difference, and that's what I really wanted you to take home, is that we see all of those, there's 40% more productivity between the top third and the total. When we look at profit per acre, it's double. The point of all this in linking those pasture systems, and I just pulled the 3 out, we can see why people would want to look more and more legume in pastures. The thing about it, in all, I guess, I should be a Flames fan, shouldn't I now, I guess? Change my allegiance. No, I'm glad to hear that. I'm sticking in there too. Way to go. You're wearing a red vest, though. I don't know if that's the best thing. I'm just noting that. So, well, Flames vest. But anyway, cheering. And the biggest thing about it I want you to take out of this is I got to kind of roll through a couple of things. It's how much you put in front of them that determines what they eat. Quality is not as important. And that's where you start talking about soil. You start talking back to Alec Johnson, leaving more in front of them. Intake is more important than quality. That's what I want you to take home with this. So the fact of the matter is, I can rent a low ground pasture that's got a lot of low ground species, as long I can rent a dry pasture that doesn't have as much, but if I'm managing for mass, I get performance more similarly. The other take home, 5 minutes, thank you, is that grazing intake. So we were talking back here about grazing intake being so important. Of that, it's only correlated to how much was there when you put them in. 23%, Jim Garrish says. What you leave behind, the golf course you leave behind, or the green mass you leave behind is 82% correlated. So the productivity of any pasture system, no matter what, still supports the one thought: grow mass. And if you really want animal intake and high performance, don't ask them to use tweezers to pick the last bit of grass. And legumes always scare people. There's a lot of reasons why people don't have legumes in a mix. You never know what to expect when you go out there. You know, but the point of that I look at is you always have to have another plan. And the other plan could be a tool like Pasture. As cost goes, days that you're worried about it, if you've got control of a water system, you can deal with it. Whenever I know a producer that says, I cannot do that, I always find another one's got an angle that they are. There's also legumes, and this is part of the project that we've got in Alberta Ag. After the 365-day grazing, now we're working with Agriculture Canada, the Erica Associations on higher legume pastures, and we actually call it the Sandfoin Project. But the reality of that is that's Sandfoin in Pincher Creek area, and that's Bill Newton and his daughter Larissa, and they were nice enough to host us out there. And there's the scientist Surya Akira that bred the new cultivar, and it is not out in the market yet. So the thought that people saying, well, you know, I'll go buy some Sandfoin, well, the older Sandfoins don't regrow. This one does. So it's really linking. It's linking a lot of things together. It's our crop choices if we want to look at it. I just look at it as a grain farmer. Is it legume grass? Is it tame grass? Is it, maybe I'm just going to leave those old hay fields that have gone downhill and manage them better. Crop choices, soil systems, looking at all of that above and below ground. The genomics side, we're certainly bringing a lot of genetic opportunities in there. To me, we can spend money on good cattle. I always say do it after you spend money on forages and good forages. Just matching the animal to the forage production isn't enough. Rick, have I got a minute? But we're looking at a number of things. The biggest thing that Llewellyn Mansky said is don't put them out in the spring until the grass is past the 3.5 leaf stage. So that is one of the things, the spring effect. That's the best way to rejuvenate a pasture, the lowest cost possible. Otherwise, you know, we got fertilizer, we've got herbicides, we got other things. People say you can't afford the fertilizer. I challenge you to say, put a cow in a truck and send her somewhere. And then hope you get them all back home and all that comes and goes with them. So often the yardage at these other pastures is more than people think. And I found when I was about 25 miles from home, my yardage was around $11 over the summer. I paid my fee for my pasture, and then furthermore, by the time I ran and checked them, had them trucked there and back, I really found that my cost was another third on top of everything else. And like Burke Tykert had said, you know, we're looking at something that we look at genetics, but we look at that. I think it's really important that we look at the grazing side of this game through this time. We're looking at the profit that's potential in this industry, but we want to capitalize on it. We don't want to be like those guys in the US that are now complaining, you know, when they were in drought and situations like that. They didn't think they took enough money home through a lot of those years where we were struggling so greatly. I think it's really important that we look at it from a standpoint of the ground up. And I know we've got a brochure on the side that talks about the Western Canadian Grazing Conference going December 9th, 10th, and 11th in Edmonton. And it's talking about going beyond sustainability. The point that they're trying to make there is we don't want somebody else to put a definition on what's sustainable. It has to be profitable. If it isn't profitable, there isn't enough money to transfer it to the next generation. There isn't enough money to capitalize on this cow opportunity we've got in the business. So let's put a lot of money in our pockets, put it where we want. I'll leave you for Rick to talk to you, because he's going to talk to you about where you can put some of these dollars and how to fit it in well. That's it. So Time for a question, I guess?
Anytime, any questions for Grant?
Is the grazing mentorship program still on?
Is the grazing mentorship program still on, Eileen asks? No. Hate to say that, yeah. No, it was one that didn't get funding continued. We tried a couple of years ago and tried to get it up and going again, but maybe now, I don't know if we're going to see something different. The thing I find so often is joining one of the Forage and Applied Research Associations, and is Jeanette? Where's Jeanette? Way at the back. You know, it's a real opportunity because with Albert Kuipers there with Grey Wooded, I find that and another thing too that I'll throw towards you, I have picked up the phone and called people anywhere. And everyone feels sorry for me, I guess, because no one's turned me down. They've always given me advice. I don't have to take it, but I can call anybody pretty well anywhere, and I mean it, I have. And the only person that ever turned me down was a professional. But other than that, I've had scientists, they spend an hour on the phone with you explaining what's going on and whatever, even producers. And I remember on the way to work in the morning calling Ulla Thompson, De Bruin, many of you people know her. I'd call Ulla in the morning on the way to work on my cell phone and say, Ulla, what should I do? And she'd spend a bunch of time with me and away I'd go. So rely on your peers, rely on the networks that are present, because no, we don't have that system. I use the insurance myself, and the reason I do is because I know feed prices go up, and I want to make sure that I've got some costs covered if things happen. Like anything, oftentimes you wish there were differences because we're so unique as operations go, and not enough people use the program. So I can't say too much about it other than that. I do support it because my concern I've had, and I've complained about, is that I'm sick and tired of taking so many chances. There's enough risk in this business as it is, and you choose and pick your spots. The fertilizer side of it, what would I say? The thing that's interesting about that, there's research that goes back to the 80s. If you're fertilizing, don't just fertilize with nitrogen. I don't know why this doesn't get said more. We want a little more phosphorus with the nitrogen. The reason we want that is it promotes the growth of broadleaf grasses that tend to be more productive. So you'll find generally that a bit of phosphorus in the system with nitrogen. We find that for the most part, we wish we had 3400, we don't. So buying 46 is what I still recommend. Pick your times, early spring, April. If the price is low enough in the fall, yeah, we can do it in the fall, but generally we lose some of the urea, some of the ammonia off of it. Doing soil tests so you actually know what's short, so you can put your investment there. The highest productivity pastures I've seen was with a Grey Wooded Forage Association project, and that dairyman up at Rimbey got 4 tons of dry matter per year over a period of 4 years off of pasture. 4 tons of dry matter. If you're looking in silage, you know, you're looking at about 11, 12 tons. That's pretty good. The fact is, he kept his soil fertility to optimum. So that's the challenge I had when I sold the tractor so many years ago. I bought fertilizer, tried to get my soil fertility levels to optimum. And then I used legumes to boost the nitrogen themselves. And so many cases, if I got legumes in the stand, I fertilize for the legumes to keep them in there, to keep them feeding the grasses, feeding the soil. But whatever's short, NPKs, what's most short is going to be the most determiner of what return you get. The thing about a lot of it is, remember, if we're taking a day of winter feed away, we've got another ace in the hole, no matter what it costs to grow more forages. We've got $1 a day savings in grazing. So that's where a lot of times an article that Dwayne McCartney and Vern Barron, I think, put out in the last Cattleman magazine, or there is a fact sheet coming out on this, talks about fertilizer needs to be compared fairly against putting cattle on trucks and sending them someplace to graze, because we often find that our stuff at home should be, your pastures at home should be your best pastures. So when the cows come home, we get big days of grazing out of them. And fertilizing them is often something to look at. Do it after grazing management, don't do it before, otherwise it addresses the symptom of the problem. Thank you. I'll be around.